Chapter 865. At such a close distance, how could the three-headed demonic dragon, Aziz Dakaha, who was the ultimate evil god of the sect of fire, make a mistake? In Aziz Dakaha's perception, Wu Ming was clearly behind him. How could he have shifted his position? How could Aziz Dakaha's Kvarina just miss Wu Ming by a hair's breadth? Whoosh! A few gusts of wind blew past Aziz Dakaha's face. The fog that was slowly dissipating due to the heat rays was also accelerated by the gusts of wind, causing it to dissipate even faster. The multiple layers of wind will refract light. The principle of light refraction was simple. It was nothing more than the refraction of light through different media at different speeds. Aziz Dakaha's guess was right. Wu Ming had used the storm incarnation to control the wind, allowing the multiple layers of wind to refract light. This caused Aziz Dakaha's Kvarina to shift a little bit. As for how to do it, Wu Ming referred to Altoria's Wind King barrier. As the closest person to Altoria, Wu Ming was very familiar with everything about Altoria, including the Wind King barrier that Merlin had designed for Altoria to hide Excalibur. Altoria's Wind King barrier was not so much a noble artifact as it was a special magic trick. The principle was simple. It simply used the multiple layers of wind attached to the holy sword to change the refractive index of light to achieve the effect of hiding the sword, preventing the opponent from obtaining information about the weapon. However, the Wind King barrier could only achieve the effect of hiding and not refracting. It could not shift Wu Ming's figure, and it was even more difficult to shift Kvarina, which was mixed with black origin soil. However, with other assistance there would be no problem. The fog that filled the Devil's Den was the product of Wu Ming's thunder incarnation to change the form of flood and annihilation. Naturally, it was also Wu Ming's authority. Thus, it was relatively easy to control. The mist itself was a thin layer of water, but Wu Ming's mist was an even thinner existence. As everyone knew, water could be refracted. Fog's refraction effect was weaker than water's, but it could still do the same. Whether it was the fog that seemed to be blown away when Aziz Dakaha used Kvarina, or the fog that combined with wind to shift Wu Ming's position, it was all done by Wu Ming. However, a simple refraction of light could not make Aziz Dakaha fall for Wu Ming's trick. Putting aside Aziz Dakaha's three-digit strength, Aziz Dakaha was also considered a wise man. He was not stupid to that extent. Therefore, relying only on storm, flood, and annihilation was still insufficient. In the end, Wu Ming activated the rarely used magician incarnation. When the magician incarnation that could perform the miracles of the gods, the storm incarnation that brought with it multiple layers of wind, and the flood incarnation and the annihilation incarnation that were affected by the thunder god incarnation, the combination of these three brought about a trick that fooled Aziz Dakaha. The wind covered Wu Ming's figure, and the fog refracted Wu Ming's figure. The god's miracle transformed the two into something that could even deceive the evil god, the ultimate illusion. As Wu Ming spoke, he raised his head and looked at Aziz Dakaha with a pair of golden eyes. Wu Ming was not good at illusions, but that did not mean he did not know how to use them. Back in Britain, Wu Ming was influenced by Merlin's powerful illusions. He had a lot of experience in illusions, and today it came in handy. Although Wu Ming did not put much effort into illusions, but with the combination of multiple powers, he finally achieved an ultimate illusion that could even deceive the gods. Aziz Dakaha's mistake was the best proof of Wu Ming's illusion. Just a trick to fool people. How dare you keep me in the dark? Aziz Dakaha was enraged. If Wu Ming could defeat him in a head-on battle, he would be convinced and would not be angry. After all, Wu Ming was the root dragon. Even if he was defeated by Wu Ming, there was nothing to be ashamed of. But Wu Ming had used a trick like illusions to get behind him. Putting aside the issue of identity, Aziz Dakaha was a three-headed demonic dragon who had mastered thousands of magic spells. It was a great humiliation that he was blinded by illusions. However, Aziz Dakaha did not need to worry about anger. He had no time to dodge. What he needed to think about now was how to deal with Wu Ming's sun that had been compressed to the size of a palm and was about to explode. The heat that he had sensed at the beginning was coming from this sun. Checkmate, Aziz Dakaha. With Wu Ming's smile, Aziz Dakaha was covered in the light of the sun. Outside the Devil's Den, the members of the community who had formed an alliance around the realm wall were terrified. After Shadora conveyed White Yiksha's instructions, they began to retreat. The huge heat ray that had pierced through the Devil's Den had destroyed a large piece of the realm wall. The aftermath of the explosion had affected many people. Although no one was killed, many were injured. Although the realm wall was not so strong that nothing could destroy it, it was not so easily destroyed. As a huge barrier that divided the community, the quality of the realm wall was naturally guaranteed. Not to mention, there was the existence of the realm gate on the realm wall, which increased the quality of the realm wall to another level. However, it was the strange heat ray that had shot out from the Devil's Den that had easily destroyed the realm wall. However, they could not be sure who had launched the attack just now. Was it absolute evil? Or was it a hero who was fighting absolute evil? However, they could be sure that it was absolute evil or the hero who was fighting absolute evil. No matter who had launched the terrifying attack just now, the other person who could fight with the opponent for a day could be said to be a formidable expert. If these people had only taken the incident of the 54545 outer gate being submerged in black mud seriously before, they were now terrified. This was also why they had started to retreat without hesitation when they learned that White Wuxia had signaled for everyone to retreat. After all, this was something that could not be helped. A member of the community in the retreating team would occasionally look at the pitch-black Devil's Den behind them. If there was another heat ray like the one just now and it hit them, the consequences would be unimaginable. It was better to retreat for a while first. Then, he looked at White Wuxia and Vera who were floating in the sky and sighed in relief. Now the ruler of the East Burrow, White Wuxia, and the most powerful demon in the North Burrow, Vera, were covering for their retreat. Even if there was another attack like the one just now, there was nothing to be afraid of. Reality proved that this person was overthinking. White Wuxia and Vera were indeed covering for their retreat, but the two of them still had lingering fears from the attack just now. That was absolute evil's move. Chapter 866. White Wuxia's expression was extremely serious. He was absolutely certain that it was absolute evil Azidakaha's move. The strongest gift of the flash element, Farina, was formed from the inheritance that destroyed 1/3 of the world. Willow will be fine. Although Vera comforted herself, she was still worried about Wuming. Since Vera was already like this, White Wuxia was naturally not any better. Even if she retrieved the spirit core, she might not be able to deal with absolute evil. If it's really the end. However, before White Wuxia could finish speaking, the entire Devil's Den instantly turned red as if it was burning from the inside. Sensing the danger, White Wuxia immediately retreated. Then, a blazing pillar of fire shot up into the sky. The entire sky was dyed red, and space began to distort from the heat of the pillar of fire. This is the flames of the sun. White Wuxia raised a hand and covered half of his face. The eruption of the pillar of fire caused a violent gale. The gale seemed to be blowing away the air, sweeping away some of the surrounding teams that had yet to completely retreat. Everyone felt suffocated for more than 10 seconds. After withstanding the strong wind with great difficulty, what came next was the extreme heat. The realm wall began to slowly melt, and part of the land outside the realm wall directly turned into magma. Among the alliance members who had yet to completely retreat, many things, such as tents, paper and human hair, were directly ignited by the heat of the pillar of fire. Even many people's clothes were burning. Even Shadora and the others with the fire dragon bloodline could not withstand the heat. The sweat that they had just excreted immediately evaporated, and their bodies also felt a severe lack of water. Some ordinary people did not even sweat and directly fainted. Some special races were also affected. For example, the body of Aisha Ignafartes, who came to volunteer as support, even fluctuated as if she was about to die. Jack was so scared that he immediately used his body to protect Aisha. It could be said that if White Wuxia had not asked the alliance members to start retreating, many people would have directly evaporated because of the pillar of fire that pierced through the entire black mud Denver. After all, the black mud cave covered the entire outer sect of the 54545. Although it was inconceivable, the fire pillars also covered the entire outer sect of the 54545. At such a close distance, White Wuxia could completely determine that the fire pillar in front of him had such an ability. Immediately following that, White Wuxia's expression changed because she realized that the pillar of fire had no intention of stopping. It was even accelerating the pillar of fire towards the sky. Not good. Seeing this scene, White Wuxia turned pale with fright. If a pillar of fire with such a range and power rushed into the sky, It would definitely smash a huge hole in the sky surrounding the box court. It might even affect a very large area of the box court curtain. This would definitely have a very serious impact on the box court. At that time, something would definitely happen to some of the races protected by the box curtain. For example, the vampires, who couldn't face the sun directly, would suddenly burn to death under the dangerous sunlight. However, someone was a step faster than White Wuxia. Swish! Vera rushed into the sky at an extremely fast speed like a hot knife through butter. It looked like Vera was prepared to block the powerful pillar of fire that rose from the ground by herself. Vera? White Wuxia cursed inwardly and immediately flew up. This pillar of fire was no trivial matter. Ignoring the range of effects, its power wasn't something that could be casually blocked. But so what? Didn't she need to block it if she couldn't block it? The answer was naturally no. White Wuxia was only complaining that Vera was prepared to take the risk alone. There was no other meaning. Therefore, White Wuxia immediately caught up to Vera. Vera, look at how quiet you are. Why are you always so impulsive? White Wuxia said to Vera as he flew at top speed. Because they will be in danger, Vera simply replied. Was it because she was a child of the community? White Wuxia glanced at the tiny people on the ground. Although direct sunlight was harmful to ghosts, it wasn't fatal. Vera didn't have to be so anxious, right? If Vera was really so responsible, the position of the North District's ruler would have been hers long ago. There must be other reasons. There's a Villo's aura in the Pillar of Fire. I have to help him resolve it before he makes a mistake. Vera meant that the Villo was the one who set the fire. As expected, it was for Wuming. White Wuxia immediately made a helpless expression. No matter what, this pillar of fire can't shatter the curtains of the box court. Otherwise it will be troublesome. White Wuxia corrected his expression. I don't have any defense-type gifts. It's too late to summon astral beasts. Vera, do you have any good ideas? To be honest, if you asked White Wuxia to destroy a city and commit murder and arson, she wouldn't have any problems. However, when it came to protection and defense, she really had shortcomings. Furthermore, she had yet to retrieve her spirit core, so she was even more of a dabbler. White Wuxia had also exposed this shortcoming during the Absolute Evil Clone's surprise attack. Of course, this couldn't be blamed on White Wuxia. Everyone had their shortcomings. Furthermore, who asked White Wuxia to encounter such perverted crises time and time again? To deal with the doppelgangers of absolute evil, not to mention White Wuxia herself, even her sworn enemy would have to put in some effort to annihilate all of them. Of course, if White Wuxia could retrieve the spirit core, she could also do it. If it was a normal attack, White Wuxia would naturally be able to defend against it. However, the Pillar of Fire this time was clearly not a normal attack. It looked like a fatal blow that Wuming had delivered to Az Dakaha. Regardless of whether Az Dakaha could block it, she, White Wuxia, had no way of blocking it for a while. Realm Gate. No. Vera's first thought was to use the Realm Gate to move the Pillar of Fire away. However, there was another Realm Gate on the other side of the Realm Gate. That might affect others. If it doesn't work, I can only release an equally powerful attack from the opposite direction to cancel it out. Although this method would cause a vertical explosion in the end, it might. No, looking at the range of the Pillar of Fire, the explosion would definitely affect some of the surrounding outer buildings. However, it was still much better than the curtain of the box being broken. In that case, I'll use the power of death to eliminate it. As a great devil born between life and death, Vera naturally controlled the power of death. Moreover, this would not cause an explosion. Vera's expression froze. She increased her flying speed and rushed directly to the top of the Pillar of Fire. Vera waved her hand. A large amount of black death energy filled Vera's surroundings and collided directly with the Pillar of Fire. It had to be said that this was effective. However, the range was too small. This Pillar of Fire affected 54,545 outer buildings. Vera could not completely block it. Leave the rest to me. White Wuxia also increased her speed. She was even faster than Vera just now. After all, White Wuxia was once the White Knight King. Vera had blocked many pillars of fire. She had to block the fish that escaped the net, no matter what. At this moment, the Pillar of Fire suddenly decreased its speed. Furthermore, it was slowly disappearing. This, if one were to ask White Wuxia when she was the most aggrieved, she would definitely answer that there was no time more aggrieved than now. Chapter 867. When Wuming released the sun, he chanted 2 lines of incantations in a row, which made the sun incarnation double in strength. Not only that, when Wuming used storm, annihilation, flood, thunder god, phoenix, sun, and magician, the power of the 7 incarnations accumulated was all stuffed into the sun incarnation by Wuming. This not only increased the sun to the point where it could cause fatal damage to Aziz Dakaha, but also increased the range of the sun incarnation to the extreme. Moreover, the black mud was simply the best fuel for the fire of the sun that was mixed with the power of the source. Therefore, it was precisely because of this, as well as the support of the power of the source, that the pillar of fire that broke out from the black mud cave could spread throughout the entire outer sect of the 54545, burning the black mud of the outer sect of the 54545 to nothing. However, Wuming was not a reckless person. After the explosion, the pillar of fire formed by the flames was released towards the sky. This was done by Wuming to prevent the explosion from spreading to the people or things nearby. It could be said that if Wuming allowed the sun to explode at will, then even if the people of the alliance retreated to a certain distance, they would still be directly vaporized. After all, this was the fire of the sun that burned the entire outer sect of the 54545, and more importantly, the surrounding outer sect might also be affected by the flames. However, if the pillar of fire were to explode towards the sky, it would not spread to the people or things around, but if the pillar of fire were to be allowed to soar into the sky, the curtain of the box would definitely be shattered. Therefore, Wuming added the power of annihilation to the sun. When the sun erupted to a certain extent, annihilation would be activated and cut the pillar of fire in the middle. As everyone knew, the pillar of fire was not a pillar, but a pillar-like object formed by the continuous eruption of flames. If it was cut in the middle, the first half of the pillar of fire would dissipate, and the remaining power of the second half of the pillar of fire would not be enough to pierce through the curtain of the box. It would not even reach that height. Wuming used this to prevent the pillar of fire from piercing through the curtain of the box. Moreover, there was a long distance between the curtains of the box and the ground, which allowed the pillar of fire to erupt for some distance. Once the fire had weakened, annihilation, which had finished its countdown, would cut off the pillar of fire. After all, if he used annihilation to annihilate the pillar of fire from the beginning, it was likely that it would not succeed. After all, the power of sun at this moment was far greater than the power of annihilation. He could only wait for the pillar of fire to weaken before cutting it in the middle to achieve the desired effect. It turned out that Wuming was right. After the pillar of fire was cut in the middle, the first half quickly dissipated, and the remaining half of the pillar of fire began to slowly dissipate due to the lack of momentum. Although White Yuxia and Vera didn't know what had happened, they were certain that it was Wuming's doing. He didn't need anyone to clean up his mess for him. He could handle it alone. What a headache. I got a big fright. White Yuxia sighed helplessly, as if he was relieved of his burden. It could be said that Wuming had once again refreshed White Yuxia's worldview. In short, the crisis of the box's curtain shattering had been resolved. However, this crisis was really child's play compared to the crisis of absolute evil. I wonder how absolute evil is doing. With this in mind, White Yuxia looked down. She wanted to see how absolute evil was doing. Clouds floated around White Yuxia, and at the same time, there were many white clouds that blocked White Yuxia's line of sight. It was obvious how high her current position was. If she was outside the box, it would be a life-threatening height for ordinary humans, but it wasn't considered high in the world of the box. It wasn't considered high for White Yuxia either. With White Yuxia's powerful eyesight, she could still see the ground clearly. Although she couldn't see everything clearly, it was almost there. The entire outer gate of the 54545 division had completely sunk into a basin-like structure because this part of the land had completely evaporated. However, at this moment, the basin was not completely dry. Instead, it was filled with red magma. This magma was formed from the magma that had not directly evaporated. It filled the entire basin the size of the 54545 outer gate. Even the realm wall surrounding the outer door of 54,545 had stopped melting after half of it had melted because of the dissipation of the fire pillar. This extraordinary sun flame is actually able to easily melt the barrier of cultivation. If White Yuxia retrieved the spirit spark to recover her strength, she could also use the power of the sun to melt the realm wall, but she couldn't melt the realm wall so quickly. It was still the same sentence. As a separation area, The realm wall that carried the realm door wasn't easily destroyed. Only Az-Dakaha, who had fused with the black soil, and Wuming, who had the power of origin, could destroy the realm wall so easily. White Yaksha didn't know much about absolute evil, but she had been in contact with Wuming for so long, but she never expected Wuming to have such strength. White Yaksha was now more and more interested in Wuming's identity. Villo, Vera, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said and flew straight down. Vera's figure blew away the clouds, allowing White Yaksha to see the full picture of the ground. White Yaksha focused her eyes. It seemed like there was someone in the magma. Although she couldn't see clearly in the magma, it should be Wuming if nothing unexpected happened. What about absolute evil? White Yaksha suddenly realized this problem. With a trace of worry, White Yaksha suddenly swooped down and followed Vera. The person in the magma was indeed Wuming, but he was motionless at this moment. Other than his shoulders and head floating above the magma, the rest of his body was soaked in the magma. Moreover, a large number of cracks had appeared all over Wuming's body. Specks of blue magic power particles were emitted from the cracks, and he allowed the magma to cause secondary damage to the spirit base. His current appearance was not caused by the explosion of the sun incarnation, but the collapse of the spirit base due to overload. Before, he forcibly used 7 incarnations at the same time, and several of them were directly at the maximum output. Although this spirit base was adjusted to the top of the servant spirit base by Wuming, it still couldn't withstand the use of 7 incarnations at the same time. If it's the original body, it should be no problem at all, Wuming said weakly. If it was the original body, let alone 7 incarnations at the same time, even 12 incarnations at the same time wouldn't be a problem. Wuming had a deep understanding of the strength of his body. Although he was trying to be brave by using his incarnation on the spirit base, he had now achieved his goal. Wuming under the magma couldn't help but clench his hand. Suddenly, a sweet voice came from the sky into Wuming's ears. Villo. Wuming subconsciously looked up. It turned out to be Vera. Are you okay, Villo? Flying above the magma, Vera looked at Wuming, who was soaked in the magma, and felt a little distressed. It's all my fault. I'm sorry. Vera apologized to Wuming with shame. If Wuming didn't help her deal with Maxwell, this wouldn't have happened. However, Wuming shook his head. Don't blame yourself, Vera. Nothing happened to me. Or rather, it was as Wuming wished. As for why, at this moment, White Yaksha also came above the magma and asked Wuming nervously. Villo. Where is absolute evil now? As if responding to White Yaksha's words, there was a surge under the magma at this moment. Otherwise, she could return the divine spark, retrieve the spirit core, and recover her former strength. In the worst-case scenario, White Yaksha could still use his final ability. Let me retrieve the spirit core. There's no need. Wuming instantly interrupted White Yaksha. Didn't I say that as long as I'm here, you just have to stay in the lower level? Although Wuming did not know if White Yaksha had any means to deal with Az-Dakaha, White Yaksha's expression just now was more like she wanted to perish together with Az-Dakaha. After all, White Yaksha was Wuming's friend. If it was someone else who wanted to perish together with absolute evil, Wuming might hesitate, but if it was a friend he knew who wanted to perish together with the enemy, Wuming would definitely be the first to object. Vera floated aside at a loss and did not speak. She just quietly watched the two of them talk. However, because the magma lake was shaking more and more violently, Vera also showed a hint of anxiety. White Yaksha, who also noticed this, was silent for a few seconds before finally sighing helplessly. Are you really okay with this? White Yaksha looked at Wuming's eyes very seriously. Wuming also responded with seriousness. Trust me. In the end, White Yaksha compromised and retreated with Vera. After White Yaksha and Vera retreated, Wuming looked at the magma lake that was becoming more and more agitated. Wuming had indeed expected Az-Dakaha to still be alive, but it was not because White Yaksha said that the final trial of humans had to be completed by humans. After all, Wuming himself was a bug and did not need to care about the rules of the box court. Wuming knew that Az-Dakaha was still alive mainly because of the information provided by Galji. Galji had said that to kill absolute evil, one had to solve the bestowal contest of the human's final trial. Furthermore, one had to break Az-Dakaha's shoulders, head, and heart at the same time before killing him. However, because of the black mud at the root, Wu-Ming considered these weaknesses useless. Wu-Ming's clone had obtained more information about Az-Dakaha from Galji in the nasalic space. Wu-Ming had also asked Galji about the universe-like power that had instantly killed one of his clones. Wu-Ming also told Galji that Galji had killed one of his clones. Galji was not surprised, perhaps because he had more or less guessed it. However, most importantly, Wu-Ming already knew what the another cosmology was. According to Galji, Az-Dakaha's another cosmology was called Avesta. Of course, the name was not important. What was important was the ability of Avesta to imitate the opposite of Az-Dakaha's own cosmology of Zoroastrianism, and the cosmology of mankind that had to be crossed over. It could be used by Az-Dakaha in a limited manner and could be used to counteract the gift of the enemy. To put it simply, Az-Dakaha's another cosmology allowed him to simulate the blessings of the enemy and use the enemy's blessings to offset the enemy's blessings. It could be said that the more enemies Az-Dakaha had, the more he could imitate and the stronger he would become. Moreover, as long as it was not the Zoroastrian or human cosmology, Az-Dakaha would not be injured or even killed after activating Avesta. The gods of the Zoroastrian sect could not kill absolute evil, and humans lacked power. Other races such as gods and astrals could not pose a threat to Az-Dakaha after activating Avesta. Az-Dakaha didn't even put a 3-digit number of enemies in his eyes. As for 2-digit numbers, he could only look at them in his eyes. Therefore, Az-Dakaha was known as one of the strongest godslayers. Wu-Ming felt that it was not an exaggeration to call him one of the strongest in the box. This was also one of the important reasons why White Wuxia felt that Wu-Ming could not kill absolute evil. Chapter 869. Wu-Ming was neither a fire worship sect deity nor a human. As long as Az-Dakaha had the simulated cosmic atlas, it was impossible for Wu-Ming to hurt or even defeat him. Wu-Ming could ignore the rules of the box and kill Az-Dakaha. If the sun, which had condensed the power of 7 avatars, hit the defenseless Az-Dakaha, he could definitely kill him. However, Az-Dakaha had the simulated cosmic atlas. If Az-Dakaha had used the power of the simulated cosmic atlas, he might have been able to survive. Perhaps it was a trump card, but Az-Dakaha had never used it. If there was a crisis, Az-Dakaha would definitely use it. And this so-called crisis was just like what happened just now. Not to mention, after fusing with the origin black mud, Az-Dakaha's another cosmology might have undergone some changes. Therefore, Wu-Ming knew that he could not kill Az-Dakaha. In other words, Wu-Ming's goal from the beginning was not to kill Az-Dakaha, but something else. With that thought in mind, Wu-Ming looked at the large whirlpool that had appeared on the magma lake. It was almost time for Az-Dakaha to appear. Walala, like a carp leaping out of the water, Az-Dakaha broke through the magma and flew into the sky. At this moment, Az-Dakaha was still covered in black mud, but the amount of black mud seemed to be much thinner than before. Az-Dakaha's heart seemed to have become transparent. The huge heart kept beating, but other than that, it did not look like he had been soaked in magma, nor did it look like he had been hit by Wu-Ming's sun avatar. But Az-Dakaha knew very well that he was almost killed. If he hadn't activated the another cosmology simulation in time, he wouldn't have been able to save himself. I have to say, my old enemy, I have underestimated you so. Then, Az-Dakaha opened his mouth again, and the black light began to condense. This was the sign of the Kvarina. I have decided to kill you here and now. In the face of the Kvarina, which was right in front of him, Wu-Ming did not show the slightest hint of panic. You can't do it, Az-Dakaha. Although his voice was weak, Wu-Ming had a smile on his face. He did not look like he was about to be killed. Then come and try. The black light in Az-Dakaha's mouth became more solid, and it looked like it was about to explode. Even now, you still haven't noticed? Your heart. Wu-Ming couldn't help but sigh. His sigh wasn't for anything else, but for the fact that Az-Dakaha hadn't discovered something yet. Az-Dakaha thought that Wu-Ming was talking about his heart being exposed, but Az-Dakaha did not take it seriously. It's just my heart that's broken. The rule that you have to break my head, shoulders, and heart to kill me is no longer effective against me with power. Wu-Ming was right. The rule was indeed ineffective against Az-Dakaha. So what if the rule is still there? You have to know that you are about to be killed by me. This time, Wu-Ming did not care. Is that so? Don't you notice that something is missing? AZ Dakaha was stunned. What? After being reminded by Wu Ming, AZ Dakaha realized what he had lost. Die! Without another word, the enraged Aziz Dokahar spat out the Kvarina that had fully materialized from his mouth. The black light of destruction covered Wu Ming and gradually covered the magma lake in a semicircular shape. It began to spread to the entire 54545 outer gate. A large number of people in the Alliance army who were affected by Wu Ming's Sun Pillar of Fire fell unconscious. The rest of the people were relieved because of the disappearance of the Pillar of Fire, but the black light that followed made the people in the Alliance army who had not yet fallen unconscious suck in a breath of cold air again. They had not even seen the face of absolute evil, and they had been almost wiped out by the aftermath of one after another. In any case, after this battle, after experiencing the disaster of absolute evil and the hero fighting against absolute evil, the aftermath of the battle between the two, for these people, this was definitely an indelible memory full of memories. The same was true for White Yaksha. Let alone experiencing it, she could not even see a battle of this level. What is it this time? White Yaksha felt helpless about the black light that gradually covered the entire magma lake. Do you have to attack with such a large range every time? However, White Yaksha also gave up. Anyway, the entire 54,545 outer gate had been reduced to a battlefield, and it was almost destroyed. As long as the remaining people did not have any accidents, it would be fine. But Vilo. Vera, who was with White Yaksha, muttered Wu Ming's name and looked at the spreading black light. Wu Ming was in the semicircular black light at the moment. Although White Yaksha also believed in Wu Ming, she still could not help but worry. I hope nothing happens. At this point, she could only choose to believe in Wu Ming. White Yaksha now regretted that she had promised Wu Ming not to take back the spirit, but just in case, she still had to prepare. If this black light continued to spread, then she would have to use her own strength. But Wu Ming was right. She just needed to believe in him. The black light seemed to be stuck and suddenly stopped spreading. Then, the black light began to shrink bit by bit. Vilo's methods. White Yaksha heaved a sigh of relief. At least Wu Ming did not want them to see that he was about to die. The people from the Alliance also heaved a sigh of relief. After all, the danger was temporarily resolved, which meant that they could live a little longer. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the people from the Alliance sped up their retreat. As long as there were no major injuries, they carried the injured and ran. You bastards, slow down! Although Mandela had already woken up, his body was still very weak. At this moment, he was being carried away by a few members of Salamandra. Coincidentally, these people were Mandela's trusted aides in Salamandra. But because of the bumpy ride, Mandela's entire body was in pain. I'm fine. Put me down. Where's Shadora? She's the most important person in Salamandra. Although Mandela was burned unconscious by Wu Ming's mist, it was not to the extent that he could not walk on the ground. But at this moment, his hands and feet were held by these trusted aides and he could not use his strength at all. He could only scold these people and ask them to put him down quickly. However, Mandela's scolding was incredible. His trusted aides used all their strength and sped up their retreat. Sir Mandela, we can't slow down. After all, we still don't know if there will be danger later. Yes, Sir Mandela. We were appointed by Lady Shadora to take care of you. Your life is the most important thing to us. Lady Shadora still has other companions by her side. Our mission is to escort Sir Mandela to a safe place. You'd better not talk, Mandela. Be careful not to bite your tongue in the wind. As they spoke, they sped up their legs again. Some of them had even started using the blessing of acceleration. As a result, Mandela was jolted even more severely, to the point where he could no longer speak. At this moment, Mandela could only let out meaningless roars. Oh! However, when his trusted aides heard this roar, they thought that Mandela's old injury had relapsed and sped up again. They thought that when they reached a safe place, they could rest assured and find a doctor to treat Sir Mandela. They completely ignored Mandela's murderous gaze. How sad. Chapter 870. In the magma lake, where Wu Ming and Az Dakaha were located, Aziz Dakaha was forced to freeze. Golden chains extended from the lava lake and wrapped around Aziz Dakaha's body, locking him tightly in the air. However, the chains did not lock him in from all directions. Although it was strange, Az Dakaha could not move. At the same time, the Kvarina of the hegemon was also locked by Aziz Dakaha. This is... Even though Az Dakaha was immobilized by the golden chains, he could still speak. My Kvarina. In his free time, Aziz Dakaha still had the time to marvel at the disappearance of his gift. At this moment, Wu Ming's voice entered Az Dakaha's ears. What a pity, Az Dakaha. Az Dakaha looked down. Wu Ming was still soaked in the lava lake, but the cracks on Wu Ming's body were getting bigger. It looked like he was about to disappear. Is this the power of the origin power? It is indeed powerful, ha ha ha. Az Dakaha was not depressed about being captured. Instead, he laughed loudly. There is no choice. If you could realize that everything I did was for my body, you would not have lost. Az Dakaha was one of the strongest people in the box court. Moreover, he had the origin black soil. Az Dakaha had the ability to stop Wu Ming from finding his body. That's right. Wu Ming's goal from the very beginning was to find his body. Wu Ming did not want to cause trouble for Az Dakaha. He only wanted to find his body after saving Shadora. In the end, Az Dakaha attacked Wu Ming. Wu Ming and Az Dakaha fought for a day in the Devil's Den just to find out if Wu Ming's body was in Az Dakaha's body. After confirming that his body was hidden in the form of a ball of light in Az Dakaha's heart, Wu Ming began his plan. He used the fog to cover himself and approached Az Dakaha at lightning speed. He used a power that even his spirit base could not withstand to attack Az Dakaha. He wanted to break open the black soil around Az Dakaha's heart and reveal his heart. Once it was revealed, everything would be easy. At an extremely close distance, Wu Ming and his body would form a connection. Wu Ming's consciousness would then be able to return to his body. The moment he returned to his body, Wu Ming felt that his injuries had healed. The black soil was also expelled from his body. Coincidentally, Wu Ming's origin power of the Sun Avatar had the power of the origin power of the 7 avatars. The last trace of the black soil was removed from his body. As a result, Wu Ming was completely liberated. A voice that could not be understood by the box court world sounded from the lava lake. Although it could not be understood, the voice had a strong penetrating power. Not only did the people around the 54,545 outer gate hear it, but the entire North District, the entire box court, from the no name to the upper levels of the box court, it could be said that everyone in the box court heard it. The experts hidden in the box, such as the 3 digits, and even the rare 2 digits, all looked in a certain direction. That direction was the place where the voice came from, the North District's middle outer door of the 54545. Anyone who heard the voice could understand that a powerful existence that they could not afford to offend had come to the box. In the middle of the lava lake of the outer door of the 54545, a huge white figure slowly rose from the lava lake. It was a huge dragon, a dragon that could cover the entire outer door of the 54545. Because of its huge size, this figure only revealed its head, shoulders, and some of its claws. At this moment, Wu Ming was sitting on the dragon's head, paralyzed. To be honest, after my body was affected by the black mud, it unexpectedly grew a step further. Wu Ming said as he touched his head. The dragon, on the other hand, had some strange feelings. After all, the dragon was Wu Ming. Another him touching his own head was very strange. Wu Ming had already mastered the ability to control 2 bodies with 1 consciousness. After his consciousness entered the main body, the originally abandoned spirit base was once again used by Wu Ming. However, it was about time for this spirit base to be used. Bang! Like glass shattering, Wu Ming on the dragon's head instantly shattered, turning into little magic particles and returning to the world. Now, it was time to deal with the problem of Az Dakaha. I have to say, Az Dakaha, you are the second strongest person I have ever met, but in the end, you will still be defeated by me. The dragon spoke slowly. Unlike Wu Ming's youthful voice in the spirit-based state, the dragon's voice sounded somewhat ancient. However, this was his real body, which gave Wu Ming a strong sense of belonging. At the same time, Wu Ming raised his dragon claw. Countless golden chains wrapped around the dragon claw, extending down to the bottom of the magma lake and wrapping around Aziz Dakaha's claws. That's right, this was the one that had entangled Az Dakaha, Wu Ming's Heaven's Lock, Enkidu. The one that had not evolved before the root had obtained it. The 5 fingers of the dragon claw moved slightly, and Az Dakaha, who was bound by the heaven lock, could not help but descend and was about to land on the dragon claw. However, Az-Dakaha wasn't going to give up so easily. Activate Avesta. Counteracted in turn, simulate in another cosmology. In an instant, Az-Dakaha once again activated the simulated universe in an attempt to break free from Wuming's control. However, there was a flash of light, and 4 or 5 golden swords instantly pierced Az-Dakaha's body. The simulated universe that had just been activated immediately lost its effect. As for Az-Dakaha's other blessings, they were all sealed by the strengthened golden sword. By the way, as soon as Wuming's consciousness returned to his body, he activated a total of 12 avatars. What's this? Az-Dakaha exclaimed in surprise. The golden sword that split the godhead, one of Welaslana's 10 avatars. If one were to say that Welaslana's authority was fused with Meckel's authority and was modified by Wu Ming to suit himself, then the golden sword was the only authority that could still see the shadow of Welaslana's authority. It was no wonder that Az-Dakaha was so shocked. He now realized that many of the abilities that Wu Ming used were similar to Welaslana's avatars. When I killed Welaslana in the other world, I obtained his authority. After fusing and modifying it, it has now become my one and only authority, Wu Ming explained casually. To think that I would lose to the same move again. This is fate. Az-Dakaha chuckled quietly. However, Az-Dakaha still had some tricks up his sleeve. Pucci, Az-Dakaha's blood vessels seemed to have exploded, and black liquid began to flow out of his body. It was the source of the black mud. Wu Ming's son had removed the black mud from Wu Ming's body, but Wu Ming did not remove the black mud from Az-Dakaha's body, so Az-Dakaha still had the power of the black mud. However, this was also Az-Dakaha's biggest failure. Because mutual restraint means that I can deal more damage to the creature that is possessed by the black mud, Az-Dakaha. Chapter 871. Wu Ming's formless power of origin continued to flow from his body to his dragon claw. Countless white flames were born. This was the fire of origin produced when the concentration of power of origin reached its peak. It could cause obvious damage to the black mud. The black mud gushing out of Az-Dakaha's body seemed to have met its natural enemy. It was constantly being burned by the flames, and as the black mud erupted from time to time, the flames would also burn fiercely from time to time, increasing the efficiency of the flames. But no matter what, the result would not change. The black mud gushing out of Az-Dakaha's body would inevitably be burned to ashes by the white fire of origin. Not only that, but even the Enkidu that locked Az-Dakaha in the sky was filled with a large amount of power of origin. Roar! Az-Dakaha couldn't help but let out a painful roar. If you didn't use the power of the black mud, you might be able to live a little longer, Wu Ming said regretfully. Unlike the state of the spirit clone, Wu Ming's power of origin was beyond imagination. And this endless source of power was the black mud of Az-Dakaha. It could be said that it was the nemesis of the black mud. It was like seeing a fire and trying to extinguish it with straw. The straw would only be burned by the fire. If Az-Dakaha had released all the black mud in his body in his previous state, it would have been easier for Wu Ming to deal with him. But unfortunately, the black mud on Az-Dakaha's body had been greatly reduced by Wu Ming's son. But this had no effect on Wu Ming. Gradually, Az-Dakaha's body turned pure white. That was the original color of Az-Dakaha's body. It seemed that the black mud on Az-Dakaha's body was almost completely burned away. Otherwise, the black mud would have been able to wrap around Az-Dakaha's body. Roar! Az-Dakaha didn't answer Wu Ming's question because the burning of his origin power was causing him so much pain that he wanted to die. He kept howling. Wu Ming could understand this kind of pain. When Gidia had detonated the black mud and injured Wu Ming had also experienced this kind of pain. It was not only physical pain, but also mental pain. It was as if there was no solution, and he could only passively endure it. It was as if he was in hell. Although what was being burned was the black mud, Az-Dakaha still felt pain. As long as there was a trace of the black mud left, he would not be able to escape this pain, this extremely fatal pain. I have indeed lost. Az-Dakaha was finally able to speak instead of howling. Perhaps because the black mud had been reduced to a minimum, Az-Dakaha's body had basically turned white. Only a trace of black could be seen on his limbs. Wu Ming quietly looked at Az-Dakaha and did not interrupt him. Instead, he waited for him to continue speaking. However, after Az finished speaking, he did not speak again. It was as if he had run out of energy and could not speak. Gradually, the black mud completely disappeared. The flames of the origin were also extinguished because of the disappearance of the black mud. Az dragon body turned from black to pure white. His shadow wings also disappeared. He was now like a three-headed lizard, locked in Wu Ming's dragon claws by the heavenly lock. Reality proved that the black mud had indeed been completely burned away by the flames of the origin. Under Wu Ming's command, the celestial lock loosened slightly. The pure white three-headed dragon that was still unable to escape the celestial lock, its four limbs drooped loosely towards the ground. Az left and right heads also drooped naturally. Only the head in the middle seemed to be struggling helplessly before it slowly lifted its head. Its black and white eyes carefully looked at Wu Ming. Then, Az spoke. Dragon of origin, this is indeed your victory. However, absolute evil, that you killed will still be born. This is a trial that humans must overcome. As someone who had temporarily become Wu Ming's kin, because of the black mud, Az now clearly understood what the Dragon of Origin was. At the same time, Az no longer called Wu Ming an enemy. Because now, he was the final human trial's absolute evil Az without the black mud. He was no longer Wu Ming's kin. Your identity and status are indeed above the world. However, the world will not completely give in because of your interference. Even if I cannot be resurrected, a new absolute evil will be born for humans to test. As Az spoke, his head in the middle gradually lowered. You don't have to worry about the future. Wu Ming did not have any ill intentions. He was just stating the truth. As he was about to die, he could not see the future. Ha! You're right. Being able to let go of everything and enter a deep sleep is not bad. Az laughed as he looked at Wu Ming. He began to talk to himself. It's a pity that humans did not surpass me. With that, Az head drooped down, and there was no more movement. He's already gone? Although Az looked like he was asleep, he was indeed dead. At this moment, of the two dragon horns on Wu Ming's head, the one at the back shone. The light shone on Az body as if it was scanning him. Then, a cold but slightly emotional female voice entered Wu Ming's mind. Master, it's confirmed that Az is mentally dead. Thank you for your hard work, Kalas. Wu Ming's voice was filled with emotion. The female voice that appeared in Wu Ming's mind was Wu Ming's magic attire. It was an extra sister machine of the same model as Ilia's Ruby and Mayo Sapphire Sophia, Lapis Kalas Balit. This crown-style magic attire followed Wu Ming's body to the box garden world. Of course, Enkidu also came with it. After confirming that Az was dead, the heavenly lock around Az body was dispelled. Then, it wrapped around Silent Dragon's arm and returned to its original position. Thank you for your hard work, little N. Wu Ming's hard work was indeed related to the two of them helping to deal with absolute evil and checking on absolute evil's death. But more importantly, it was Wu Ming's gratitude to Enkidu and Kalas for protecting his body in the box garden world. He thanked them for protecting him. Chapter 872. What was there to protect? Because Wu Ming saw it. After all, it was the experience of his original body, so Wu Ming, who had returned to his body, would naturally see the past experience in an instant. If he had to say something, it could be said that this was the only special vision. At this moment, Wu Ming slowly closed his eyes, preparing to digest the things he had seen before. The moment Wu Ming returned to his body, he saw all the experiences of his body in the world of the box court. However, because Az was still in front of him, Wu Ming did not look at it in detail. Now that Az had been destroyed, Wu Ming could read it again. Back then, when the box court had just been established, Wu Ming's body fell from the sky into the box court, and coincidentally, it fell at the location where No Name used to be. At that time, No Name had not yet established a community in that location, and the surrounding area was even a wasteland. Of course, most of the areas in the box court's early days were wastelands, because there were not many people in the box court when it was first established. Especially the outer sect with the lower numbers, it could be said that in the beginning, there were unimaginably few people in the seven-digit outer sect. Similarly, because the box court's early system had not yet been established, the box court could be said to be very chaotic at that time. Wuming, this thing that exuded a powerful aura, also attracted a lot of attention. Many forces and even individuals came to the seven-digit outer sect to investigate, but the result was naturally to no avail. As for why, it was because they could not find any abnormalities. It was because the black origin mud covered up Wuming's aura, and the black origin mud sealed Wuming together with it. At that time, Wuming's consciousness had already returned to the big origin, so naturally, he could not move. However, Wuming's body was still suffering from the corrosion of the black origin mud, so Kalas and Enkidu combined the power of the black origin mud in Wuming's body to create a light membrane. They turned Wuming's body into a ball of light, sealed him together with the black origin mud, and buried him deep underground to prevent the black origin mud from flowing out. The two of them had experienced a lot with Wuming, and had seen the power of the black origin mud. In their opinion, if Wuming had consciousness at that time, he would have made the same choice. The facts proved that this was indeed the case. If Wuming still had consciousness at that time, he would have let the two of them seal the black mud together with his own body if there was no other way, so that the black mud would not leak out. However, in that case, the black origin mud could only continuously corrode Wuming, who was also inside the ball of light. Wuming did not think much of it. After all, his injuries could slowly recover, but those who were injured by the black origin mud would not be healed so easily. This was also one of the reasons why Wuming did not want the black origin mud to flow out. Fortunately, the black origin mud was boundless water and did not have a source. Once it was drained, it would completely disappear. In addition, Wuming's body was constantly producing origin power, so Wuming's body did not suffer too much damage. At most, he would feel a little pain. However, since Wuming's consciousness was not in his body, he naturally could not feel any pain. Therefore, Wuming did not blame Kalas and Enkidu for Wuming's actions. Although this was the case, Kalas and Enkidu had always placed Wuming first. If they did not understand Wuming, the two of them would not have chosen to seal the black origin mud and Wuming's body. Instead, they would have allowed the black origin mud to flow into this world and protect Wuming's body from harm. However, if they did that, Wuming would definitely be furious when he found out about their actions. Therefore, the two of them chose to seal the black origin mud and Wuming's body. However, they did not choose to sacrifice Wuming for the sake of the world. Kalas and Enkidu both understood that if they did that, Wuming's body would continue to be corroded by the black origin mud. Although it would not kill Wuming, it would still cause serious injuries to him in the end. Therefore, after the two of them chose to seal Wuming's body together with the black origin mud, they also chose to take the damage for Wuming. As Wuming's personal belongings, even if the two of them chose the world, they would not give up on Wuming. The true meaning of being Wuming's personal belongings was to have both of them. Within the sphere of light, Enkidu extended his chains to their maximum length, completely wrapping around Wuming's body, while Kalas converted all of her mana into 100% defense, buffing Enkidu and Wuming's bodies. As a result, most of the black origin mud's connection with Wuming was severed. Only a small portion of the black origin mud in Wuming's body was still corroding Wuming's body. However, the endless amount of origin power he produced resisted it, so Wuming's body did not suffer much damage. However, Enkidu and Kalas suffered greatly. As existences who had followed Wuming for a long time, they had also produced a trace of origin power when they were in the origin. It was by relying on this trace of origin power that the two of them were able to resist the corrosion of the black origin mud and protect Wuming's body. However, it was precisely because they had origin power that the two of them continuously endured the pain brought about by the black origin mud. By the way, Kalas had used her ability to scan Wuming's consciousness and determined that Wuming's consciousness had automatically returned to the backup machine in the origin, because he could not bear the pain brought about by the black origin mud's explosion. Also, although the explosion had also affected Enkidu and Kalas, the two of them were unexpectedly only slightly affected by the explosion, while Wuming seemed to have taken the brunt of the damage caused by the black origin mud. Under the circumstances where they were not injured, the two of them chose to seal the black origin mud in Wuming's body, protecting both the world and Wuming's body, while quietly waiting for the day when Wuming would find his body. It had to be said that Wuming was quite angry when he saw this scene. What they did was no different from slow suicide because they could not resist the corrosion of the black origin mud at all. If possible, Wu-ming really hoped that the two of them would have allowed the black origin mud to corrode Wu-ming. Although it was impossible to guarantee that the two of them would not be corroded by the black origin mud, they could have attracted a lot of firepower. Although it was just a guess, it made sense that Wu-ming had attracted the firepower when Gidia detonated the black origin mud. After all, Wu-ming was a good fuel for the black origin mud. Even if he had to take a lot of damage, it would not have been a big deal. After all, Wu-ming's body could produce an endless amount of origin power, so he was not afraid of the black origin mud. At most, he would be seriously injured. Speaking of which, it was really strange. Collis and Enkidu were willing to sacrifice themselves for Wu-ming, while Wu-ming, who saw this scene, was also willing to let himself attract the firepower. It was really contradictory. However, it was also because of this that the bond between Wu-ming, Collis, and Enkidu was manifested. It was also because of this that Wu-ming said emotionally to the two of them, "Thank you for your hard work." But in the end, the two of them still survived. Even if Wu-ming's consciousness was not present, he would not just wait for the two of them to suffer continuous damage and slowly die. This was because Enkidu's body, chains, and Collis's body, crown, were tightly attached to Wu-ming. Because of this, the origin power in Wu-ming's body seamlessly acted as a reinforcement. The origin power was transmitted to the two of them, allowing them to successfully resist the black origin mud and survive until now. Because of the black origin mud, Wu-ming's aura had been concealed very well. Many people who had established a community in the outer sect of 2105380 did not discover any traces of Wu-ming. It seemed that they had completely treated the legend of a mysterious object that had once fallen here as a mere story. Day after day passed. Gradually, Wu-ming completely cleaned out the black origin mud in his body. Collis and Enkidu also had the support of Wu-ming's origin power to slowly devour the black origin mud. And when the amount of black origin mud decreased to a certain extent, Wu-ming's powerful, mysterious, and noble aura leaked out. As a result, Wu-ming's aura caused the surroundings to change. Chapter 873. At that time, many communities had already been established in the surrounding area. After hearing about this, they all tried to occupy this place, wanting to dig out the gift from the ground and take it for themselves. However, because of the mutual interference, no community was able to occupy this place. Not long after, perhaps Enkidu and Collis realized this problem. The reduction of the black mud caused Wu-ming's aura to leak out a little. Therefore, the two of them worked together to use the power of the origin in Wu-ming's body to strengthen the seal of the light membrane, causing the leaked aura to disappear. However, even if the aura disappeared, it was too late. The mysterious aura had indeed appeared here before, so it was still debated, and the surrounding communities were still fighting over it. In the past, No Name, who was not far from here, heard about this matter and came over. They took root in this land and put an end to the surrounding community's greed for the powerful gift under this land. At that time, No Name was the ruler of this area, so they had the right to do so. Of course, there were rumors in the outside world that No Name came to be the peacemaker in order to monopolize the mysterious gift in this land. However, No Name did not have such intentions. Even if they did, they would not be able to find the specific location. After all, the seal had been strengthened by Enkidu and Collis. However, there was no guarantee that there would be a next time when the aura would leak out. No Name, who did not monopolize the mysterious gift, Wu-ming, once again sealed this land. Although it was called a seal, it was actually just a barrier that isolated them from the outside world. The purpose seemed to be to prevent Wu-ming's aura from leaking out again. Days passed like this, and Wu-ming's aura did not leak out again. Some of the surrounding communities also changed dynasties. Simply speaking, this matter had gradually faded away. However, 3 years ago, the Demon King suddenly attacked No Name for unknown reasons. After defeating No Name and taking away almost everything No Name had, the people behind the Demon King dug up Wu-ming along with the ground and took him away. Even if the other party didn't come for Wu-ming, they must have planned to kidnap this mysterious gift of Wu-ming as well. It seemed that the hole that Wu-ming had seen in No Name, that had a trace of his own aura, was left behind in this way. After that, perhaps for the sake of research, someone accidentally broke the seal. As one could well imagine, the source of the black mud emerged. Although Wu-ming couldn't see the other party's face clearly, he knew that they were definitely from the faction behind Galji. Although they also realized that there was something in the black origin mud, The power of the Black Origin mud might have exceeded their expectations, and they panicked for a moment. But right after that, Wuming, Enkidu, and Collis all entered a black box, which seemed to be a seal-type gift. This didn't mean that the black root soil was harmless just because Enkidu and Collis stopped their plan to eliminate it. The black root soil was still very corrosive when it was with something that was filled with the aura of origin power. In short, Wuming was sealed again. However, it seemed that the seal wasn't very effective. The black root soil was constantly corroding the seal, and this was also thanks to Wuming's origin power, eliminating a large amount of the black root soil. If it was the original amount of black root soil, let alone 3 years, the seal would have been broken in less than 3 days. And because they seemed to have fallen into the hands of an unknown enemy, Enkidu and Collis slowed down or even stopped their work of eliminating the black root soil. They wanted to wait for Wuming to come to this world first. After all, if they completely eliminated the black root soil before Wuming arrived, Wuming's unconscious body would definitely be used by this unknown enemy. As for why, Wuming guessed that the other party was the enemy behind Galgi, but Enkidu and Collis didn't know. However, there was one thing that they were certain of, and that was that the people who attacked No Name and took away Wuming's body were not good people. At the very least, they were already on opposing sides, not to mention that these people were also trying to study Wuming. And the black root soil became an invisible shield, protecting Wuming's body from being studied by the enemy. And without origin power, these people had no good way to break the black root soil, unless they assimilated with the black root soil. However, Wuming felt that they would definitely not choose to do so. As for why, it was just Wuming's intuition towards these people with bad habits. After that, about 3 years had passed. From time to time, some people would open the seal to examine and study it. It seemed that they were not willing to accept the fact that the black root soil was a hot potato, and felt that they had to study it even if they had to burn the skin of their hands. During this period, people or objects would be thrown in from time to time, as if those people were studying the black root soil. However, whenever a third-rate person came in, Enkidu and Collis would use their origin power to corrode the black root soil, and the stimulated black root soil would corrode the person who came in. It must be known that if the black root soil was accepted by an outsider, it would fuse with that person like a symbiotic entity. If that happened, it would be difficult to deal with, which was why Enkidu and Collis did this. As for indirectly causing the death of someone, but this was the right thing to do. First, it could prevent the enemy from studying Wuming's body, and prevent the enemy from having the opportunity to study it. Second, it could prevent the black root soil from fusing with an outsider as a parasite, because if an evil person were to coexist with the black root soil, then it would cause a disaster in this world. Thinking about it this way, Enkidu and Collis could be considered to have contributed to the box garden world. In short, they did not study anything for 3 years. It was unknown whether they were not in a hurry or were not interested, but the number of times they opened the sealed box to experiment on Wuming also decreased. Perhaps it was also related to the fact that they did not study anything even once. One day, someone opened the seal on the box and put Wuming's body into multiple layers of gift cards. Without the seal effect of the box, the mere gift cards could not resist the corrosion of the black root soil. In the end, the black root soil destroyed all the gift cards, and the black root soil poured into the outside world. At the same time, the black root soil seemed to have broken some kind of seal on the outside world and released a white 3-headed dragon. The last thing Wuming's body saw was the 3-headed dragon absorbing the black root soil, including Wuming's body, into its body. The light that Wuming's body turned into was right where the 3-headed dragon's heart was. Needless to say, this was definitely Galgi's doing. He put the unsealed black root soil into the seal of absolute evil. The black root soil, which was also a bug like Wuming, easily broke Az Dakaha's seal. Wuming already knew the rest, so he didn't need to continue watching. Chapter 874. Collis, record my memory and make it into a projection. I might need it later. Wuming opened his eyes and said to the dragon horn headpiece on his head. Yes, master. Collis began to read Wuming's memory. Without a doubt, Collis, as a pure support-type magic attire, could definitely do this. Reading Wuming's memory was nothing to be surprised about. Wuming, who trusted Collis very much, wouldn't care about this. As for Collis, who was extremely loyal to Wuming, her mission was to perfectly carry out Wuming's orders. Then, Wu-ming looked at the golden chain on his dragon arm. Enkidu, are you there? Master Wu-ming, I'm here. Enkidu's elf-like voice entered Wu-ming's mind. Enkidu and Collis were very similar. They were both existences without bodies. The former lost her body, while the latter didn't have a body to begin with. Both of them were also loyal to Wu-ming and were willing to follow Wu-ming for the rest of their lives. Both of them defined themselves as Wu-ming's tools for Wu-ming to use. Enkidu's actions were even more serious than Collis. Collis was an existence similar to an artificial intelligence, so it was natural for her to talk to Wu-ming. On the other hand, Enkidu was a heavenly lock, a chain. What was a chain? It was a weapon, and a weapon didn't need to communicate with its master. Therefore, Enkidu and Wu-ming didn't have much interaction. She wouldn't be jealous of Collis. After all, Enkidu could speak whenever he wanted to. Wu-ming didn't forbid Enkidu from speaking. It was just that Enkidu didn't want to speak because of his definition of a weapon. However, whenever Wu-ming took the initiative to talk to Enkidu, Enkidu would always respond to Wu-ming enthusiastically. Seeing that Enkidu responded to him, Wu-ming didn't rush to talk to Enkidu. Instead, he continued to call out to Collis. And Collis? Master? Collis asked. After the two of them turned their attention to Wu-ming, Wu-ming spoke. This kind of situation won't happen again, I promise you. Wu-ming's tone was full of seriousness. Wu-ming was naturally referring to Enkidu and Collis, who had followed Wu-ming's body into this world for an unknown period of time. Moreover, they had been protecting Wu-ming's body for such a long time. At that time, due to the unbearable pain caused by the explosion of the black soil, Wu-ming's consciousness directly separated from his body. This was something that couldn't be stopped. Although this wasn't Wu-ming's fault, and Enkidu and Collis didn't blame Wu-ming, Wu-ming couldn't stand it. Last time was my mistake. I promise you, there won't be a next time. What Wu-ming meant was that next time, he would definitely eliminate Gidia completely. He definitely wouldn't let Gidia do it again. Of course, we agree with the idea of eradicating Gaia, but Collis paused mid-sentence, and Enkidu continued. You don't have to do this, Master. The two of them meant that Wu-ming didn't have to make a special promise to them. No matter what, I will always be your chief priest, Master Wu-ming. There isn't a priest who doesn't want to stay with the god they believe in. You are my master, and I don't think it's a sad thing to stay with you. Wu-ming couldn't help but laugh in his heart. I was being pretentious. Indeed, with the relationship between Wu-ming, Enkidu, and Collis, there was no need for him to take care of himself. However, Wu-ming always forgot, or perhaps it was because he valued Wu-ming so much that he forgot. Now, let's deal with the problem of Az Dakaha. After Wu-ming finished speaking, he looked at his dragon claw. Silent sound hadn't done much damage to Aziz Dakaha. All he had done was bind him with the sky lock, burn him with the origin fire, and stab him with the gold sword. That shouldn't have been enough to kill Aziz Dakaha. In the end, Az Dakaha died just like that. It was a dramatic scene of, I didn't even do anything and you're already dead. According to what Collis said, Az Dakaha died of spiritual causes. Collis, what do you mean by spiritual death? Wu-ming asked. Master, the spiritual death that I have concluded is the disappearance of the soul. In other words, your physical body is still alive. That was why Az Dakaha looked like he was asleep. Simply put, his soulless body was not completely dead. Wu-ming guessed that Aziz Dakaha's powers had been sealed by the gold sword, which caused his godhead to be low. Afterward, the origin fire burned the black mud in his body and burned his soul away. Although Az Dakaha's body was still alive, it was only a matter of time before he died. What was important was the words Az Dakaha left behind before he died. As a Bug, Wu-ming could indeed ignore the rules and forcefully eliminate the trials that humans had to pass if they wanted to survive. However, at the same time, the world would create new trials for humans to pass. For example, your neighbor's parents arranged for your neighbor's child to mow the grass by hand to train him. Coincidentally, you were weeding with a lawnmower. Afterward, you helped the neighbor's child mow the grass. This would be seen by the parents, but because you had good intentions, they would not say anything. However, for the sake of their child, they would still give the child a new training mission. It was the same in the box court world. Wu-ming helped humans eliminate the trials that they had to pass, so the world would rearrange the trials for them. Az Dakaha, who had the identity of absolute evil in the final trial, was indeed killed by Wuming. However, the identity of absolute evil was not killed. The world could pull out another evil god from the myths and let him become absolute evil for humans to pass the trials. This problem needs to be solved, Wuming said in a low voice. From the world's point of view, humans who had become the leader of all things had to accept the trials to prevent humans from becoming arrogant and destroying the world and themselves. However, from Wuming's point of view, even without the trials, humans would not become like that. Wuming believed in humans and the infinite possibilities of humans. However, the world was not human. It would not reason with you and would only do things according to the rules. Absolute evil. Wuming stared at Az-Dakaha's corpse and pondered. It seemed like he was considering a certain possibility. However, at this moment, within the range of Wuming's mental power, two figures flew over from afar. Chapter 875. These two figures were White Wuxia and Vera. Holy White Dragon. White Wuxia slowly reduced her flying speed. The other party's aura gave White Wuxia, who was nervous at the moment, a very dangerous feeling. Right now, she was not the opponent of this dragon that occupied almost the entire magma lake. Not only that, the dragon gave White Wuxia a very unusual feeling. It was as if she was facing the whole world. At the same time, there was a sense of familiarity, as if she had seen it somewhere before. White Wuxia shook her head and stopped thinking about it. The most important thing now was, she had to determine whether this dragon was an enemy or a friend first. Willow is there, Vera said casually again and rushed over again. Wait a minute. Vera? White Wuxia felt a headache coming on. Vera was good at everything, but she was a natural airhead, which was quite helpless. In this helplessness, White Wuxia also sped up and flew over with Vera. White Wuxia, Vera, you're here. Wuming saw the two people coming and greeted them. Thou are a Willow? White Wuxia was shocked. It was not White Wuxia's fault for not recognizing Wuming. After all, although the aura of the follower's spiritual base and the aura of the main body were somewhat similar, Wuming's main body's aura was more unique. It was like the difference between tofu and stinky tofu. In short, this seemingly dangerous dragon in front of them was one of them. Vera has become so big. Vera excitedly flew around Wuming's big head and said, Is it very big? I think it's just right. Although Wuming did not have much awareness, his body had indeed grown a lot in the box court world. After all, he had fallen into the box court world since the creation of the box court. Although it had not reached hundreds of millions of years, it had been thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, and so on. In short, it could only be more and not less. And such a long time of settling down in exchange for Wuming's growth. At this moment, he was not much smaller than the 54545 outer sect. If he spread his wings that had been curled up, he would probably completely surpass this outer sect. As for how big an outer sect was, Wuming had no idea. Anyway, the box court world was very big. The diameter of the Earth was about 12,700 kilometers. From the North District to No Name, it would be 980,000 kilometers. Moreover, this was the distance from the North District to No Name. Moreover, Wuming's current body size could be freely controlled. Therefore, the size of his body was not very significant. Really, my heart has been taken care of during this period of time. It had to be said that White Wuxia, who was used to living a peaceful life, was a bit like an old man. Once he was stimulated, his heart would not be good. Just as Wuming was thinking this, White Wuxia instantly looked at Wuming. She had a nagging feeling that Wuming was thinking of something bad. Vera, on the other hand, saved the day. Willow, are you hurt? Vera, who had flown to Wuming's head, sat down on Wuming's head without holding back. I'm fine. Thanks to Az-Dakaha. My body has been found. Also, Az-Dakaha is already dead, Wuming said as he lifted Az-Dakaha's corpse in his dragon claws. Back then, I thought that thou must be extraordinary. I didn't expect thy true identity to exceed my expectations. White Wuxia also approached Wuming and observed him carefully. At this moment, Az-Dakaha was no longer that important. I have a feeling that I've seen thee somewhere before. Looking at Wuming, a sense of familiarity surged in White Wuxia's heart again. However, She just could not recall where she had seen Wuming. When White Yaksha said this, Wuming had some guesses. According to White Yaksha's experience, White Yaksha had probably existed when Wuming had fallen into the box court. White Yaksha at that time should have been called White Night King. Since that was the case, it was not strange that White Night King had sensed Wuming's aura. Perhaps my aura had leaked into this world at some point. After all, my identity is very special. Dragon of Origins. White Yaksha suddenly spoke. Wuming was shocked. He did not say anything, but White Yaksha had guessed it immediately. Although Wuming's expression did not change much and he did not answer White Yaksha's question, it was because of Wuming's appearance that White Yaksha was even more certain that her guess was correct. Ma, don't be so surprised. It's not strange that I know about the Dragon of Origins. I'm one of the top 10 in the box court. White Yaksha smiled rather proudly. White Yaksha's words made Wuming fall into deep thought. It seemed that from the beginning until now, many people knew about the existence of the Dragon of Origins. Back then, Wuming's master Skaha had seen through Wuming's essence at a glance. Although that was related to Wuming's incomplete awakening, many people still recognized Wuming's identity later on. Although many knew of Wuming's identity because they had come into contact with the Black Origin soil, there were also those who knew of Wuming's identity without coming into contact with the Black Origin soil. Without exception, they were all high-level existences, such as gods. Back in the burning Winterwood City, although the twin goddesses' combat strength was very weak, they had seen through Wuming's identity just by coming into contact with Wuming. They had surrendered because of that. As a star spirit, White Yaksha had also recognized Wuming's identity. Perhaps that was the reason. White Yaksha seemed to have seen through Wuming's thoughts, so he spoke. It seems that you have something on your mind. After this matter, I have something to say to you. You will definitely like it. It seemed that White Yaksha wanted to discuss the problem of the power of origins with Wuming in detail. Wuming was naturally eager for this. He still hoped to obtain more information about the Dragon of Origins from an insider. After all, Wuming had never seen his own race. Wuming's hometown had been found. Now, it was time to find Wuming's own race. Now we have to deal with the problem of absolute evil. As White Yaksha spoke, he landed on Wuming's dragon claw and arrived beside Az Dakaha's body that had yet to completely die. If you killed absolute evil, I'm afraid it won't be so easy to deal with, right? White Yaksha turned his head and looked at Wuming's big eyes. From the looks of it, White Yaksha also knew that the power of origins was a bug. According to Az Dakaha's last words, a new absolute evil might be born after Az Dakaha's death, but this absolute evil will no longer be Az Dakaha. Although he said that, Wuming didn't have a headache at all. It's indeed very difficult. White Yaksha fell into deep thought. She was the same as Wuming. She also had a headache over the world's actions. Look at how confident you are. Could it be that you have a good idea? With my strength, even if another absolute evil appears, I can still easily destroy it, Wuming replied in a deep voice. Indeed, with Wuming's nature of ignoring the box court's rules, all he needed to do was use powerful means to attack the new absolute evil. He didn't need to care about the restrictions brought about by absolute evil's identity. But that way, a new absolute evil will definitely be born, right? White Yaksha shook his head and denied it. That's why I'm not prepared to do that. Wuming shook his head. I have a better idea. Chapter 876. However, at that moment Vera, who had remained silent, suddenly spoke. Villo, isn't it hot to stay in here all the time? Vera asked in concern as she tilted her head. After hearing Vera's words, Wuming also realized this point. It's not hot, but I still have to thank Vera for her concern. As the magma didn't cause much damage to Wuming, well, basically no damage, Wuming subconsciously ignored this point. To Wuming, soaking in the magma was like soaking in a hot spring that wasn't too hot. It wasn't very comfortable, but it was at least warm. Speaking of which, it's indeed inconvenient to talk to you like this. After Wuming said that, his body emitted light as his dragon body transformed into a blob of light that instantly shrank. When the light dissipated, Wuming in his human form floated in the air with Vera in his arms and appeared in front of White Yaksha. He still had black hair and red eyes. There weren't any major changes. Where's Absolute Evil's corpse? White Wuxia asked. How could such a large human in the final trial be gone in an instant? I've placed AZ Dakaha's corpse in my gift card. It might come in handy later. As Wu Ming spoke, he raised his free hand and waved the gift card in his hand. Ignoring the fact that the three-headed dragon was already dead, his body wasn't completely dead. Even if it was a living creature, it could be stored in the gift card. Wu Ming's body had been stored in the gift card, so Celestia could also enter Wu Ming's gift card. By the way, White Wuxia, did the flames created by the sun's incarnation injure anyone? Wu Ming was very clear about the power of the flame pillar created by the sun's incarnation. It was a powerful flame that affected the entire outer sect of the 54545 sect. If there was anyone around, they would probably be injured if not killed. Thanks to you, no one died. When Wu Ming said this, White Wuxia was furious. After all, the power of that attack was too great. If White Wuxia hadn't been cautious and let the people of the Alliance retreat first, not many of them would have been able to survive. This wasn't a joke, but a fact. Not many people in the Alliance could withstand Wu Ming's Sunday. Although it was called an alliance, it was only a team formed by a dozen or so communities in the outer sect. Furthermore, due to Absolute Evil's sudden attack, it was unrealistic to instantly form a true alliance. If not for Vera's presence and the news of White Wuxia's impending arrival, few people would have been able to resist AZ Dakaha. After all, White Wuxia, White Wuxia, White Wuxia's White Wuxia, and Wuxia's White Wuxia's thought. They were the weaks, they were Wuxia. However, if they ran away, the ordinary residents of Boxting would suffer. The reason why these communities were able to take root in their respective lands was not because of their powerful strength, but also because the nearby residents helped each other. If you can save my life when I'm in danger, it's not in vain for me to take care of you. This could be considered a debt of gratitude. However, people like Shadora didn't care about debt of gratitude. Or rather, she still didn't understand the so-called debt of gratitude. In her opinion, her salamandra was taken care of by the outer sect members of the 54545 Wuxia. Therefore, she would definitely stand in front of everyone to fight against the incoming enemy. Moreover, if a Wuxia escaped, the reputation of the Wuxia would be ruined. The Wuxia world's most important component. If one had to describe it, it was equivalent to a country. However, Wuxia had a lot of countries. The name and flag of a country naturally became the two most important things. And the thing that was linked to these two was reputation. Although Wuxia didn't have a bad reputation after being attacked by the Demon King, they were no longer welcomed by others. After all, Wuxia was so weak that they couldn't even feed themselves, let alone have any value in befriending them. However, No Name did not have a bad reputation. In other words, if No Name became stronger, there would still be people who wanted to befriend him. Similarly, if your reputation was tarnished, then no one would want to befriend you. In fact, no one would want to befriend you in the future. As mentioned earlier, the number of communities in the box court world was more than the number of stars in the sky. There was no need for the other communities to be so close to you, as there were other communities that could replace you. Under the same condition with only one variable, if one community had a much better reputation than the other, any smart person would choose to associate with the community with a good reputation instead of the community with a bad reputation. From this, it could be seen how important reputation was to the community. Therefore, when they learned that Vera and White Wuxia were helping, these people gritted their teeth and took a gamble. If they won, it would increase their reputation. If they lost, then. Anyway, if they didn't gamble, they wouldn't be able to survive in the end. At the very least, these people were here. Since they were here, no matter what their mentality was, they were all family. As for his family, White Wuxia felt that it was fine as long as they didn't die. Since no one died, let's think of a way to restore the outer door of 54545. Wu Ming looked at the surrounding magma. Not only was a large area of the outer door of 54,545 hollowed out, but it was also covered by magma of unknown depth. Even if there were any special gifts, it would take a long time to restore the outer door of 54,545 that had turned into magma to its original state. Thou needn't worry about that. Although it will take a lot of time, it's just the ground and buildings. It's not difficult for me or the people of outer door of 54,545. White Yuxia was right. Although the resources in the North District were scarce, on the contrary, the North District had a large number of gifts that could be used for a long time. Some useful gifts could be used to remove the magma or directly transform it into the ground. The main point was that because of Wu Ming's monstrous fire pillar, many people were dehydrated, burned, and unconscious. Many people are injured. If this drags on, no one knows if their lives will be in danger. At the moment, we don't have time to treat them. This was what troubled White Yuxia. Although the North District had many gifts that could be used for a long time, there weren't many healing-type gifts. Moreover, there were so many people. Fortunately, AZ Dakaha was defeated. If these bug-like people were to fight AZ Dakaha, they would probably be sending themselves to their deaths. Since it's because of me, let me help. Wu Ming volunteered. Chapter 877. After Wu Ming finished speaking, he fully released his mind power. In an instant, it spread throughout the entire outer 54545, and he easily saw the wounded. There are so many of them? Even Wu Ming was shocked. See? That's right, there are so many of them. White Yuxia sighed. You did give me a shock, but... As Wu Ming spoke, he threw Vera, who had been obediently lying in his arms without speaking, into the sky. Ugh! Although Vera was not frightened, she still let out a whimper. Immediately after, Wu Ming shook his body and light covered his entire body. His body expanded greatly and turned back into a dragon's body, but this time, his body was much smaller than before. And Vera, who was thrown up high by Wu Ming, just happened to be sitting on Wu Ming's neck. Villo? Are you going to help the wounded? Vera, who was sitting on Wu Ming's neck, held Wu Ming's dragon horns tightly with both hands and looked at Wu Ming with her head tilted to the side. Of course, although I did get a shock, this amount is still not a problem. As Wu Ming spoke, he did not care about White Yuxia anymore. He flapped his wings and flew away. Really, since you're so confident, let me see. White Yuxia could only smile helplessly. Then, he slowly followed Wu Ming. With Wu Ming's current speed, it only took a few seconds to fly to the outer 54,545's realm wall. Wu Ming looked at the half-melted realm wall and could not help but sigh. Even the realm wall can't withstand it. Looks like I went a little overboard. However, in this way, Wu Ming had a further understanding of the power of his authority. Staying in the air, Wu Ming looked down at the people below who were panicking because of his arrival. They really did not know that AZ Dakaha had been killed. And Wu Ming was emitting an extremely powerful aura, so it was inevitable that they would panic. However, this panic was only temporary. This was because Wu Ming had already started chanting the spirit of words. Along with Wu Ming's words, the pointer on the huge disc in Wu Ming's heart suddenly pointed to the direction of 7 o'clock. The incarnation of vitality was instantly activated. Wu Ming's whole body was exuding a strong breath of life. Then, Wu Ming chanted a new incantation. In the disc in his heart, the second needle of the new needle pointed to the 6 o'clock direction. God says that humans are sinful. God said that humans needed to be purified. With this, you will bestow the torrential flood upon me. In the name of the Supreme King, I will grant the people of this world equal freedom. For a moment, the flood was also activated. The so-called flood was generally a natural disaster of God. In other words, the flood came from the sky, rain. The reason why it could become a flood on the ground was because the amount of rain was too much. Then, if the amount of rain was reduced, wouldn't it become normal rain? For example now. The sun was still hanging in the sky, and there were no dark clouds, but the rain came out of nowhere. Drop by drop it fell on the ground and fell on the people. The area was so large that it even affected the surrounding outer doors. Why is it suddenly raining? There are no clouds either. Is it the enemy's move? Is it the work of the wyvern in the sky? This group of people was noisy, and they began to look for tools to shelter themselves from the rain. Some even took out the gift of shelter. However, not everyone thought that it was an enemy attack. Some people who were guarding their unconscious companions found that their unconscious companions had woken up. Their originally red and hot bodies had calmed down, and their injuries were basically healed. Some people who were directly drenched in the rain found that their small injuries had disappeared directly. There were also people who were not injured. Although they were not injured, they were slightly tired, but after being drenched by the rain, their fatigue disappeared. There's grass growing? A sharp-eyed person suddenly saw a blade of grass rapidly growing out of the ground. The fresh leaves were verdant and full of life. Following that, someone shouted, "This rain is full of vitality." It was not known who had a special gift, but he directly used the gift to test the rain and found out that the rain contained a lot of vitality. All kinds of phenomena made the people unable to react, but that person's words were like the last straw that broke the camel's back, making the people explode. The people who were originally sheltering from the rain no longer sheltered from the rain and directly ran into the rain. The people who took out their grace to block the rain silently put it away with their faces flushed red. The unconscious and injured people were also pushed to the open space where there was no shelter and were drenched in the rain. Looking at the people who were constantly moving below, Wu Ming couldn't help but shake his head. They didn't know whether the enemy was destroyed or not, but they were still so excited because of the rain of life. Sure enough, most people were a bunch of crooks. However, there were still people who were still vigilant, such as Shadora. Although Shadora and Salamandra were also receiving the baptism of the rain of life, Shadora was still constantly giving orders, such as taking care of the injured and paying attention to the investigation, and so on. Villow's ability? At this time Vera, who was riding on Wu Ming's neck, also opened her mouth because she was also in the baptism of the rain of life. The power obtained from killing a god is not worth mentioning, Wu Ming said rather modestly. The vitality and recovery brought by the incarnation of vitality, fused with the incarnation of flood, to help the injured recover in the form of rain. It was a very simple use of the power. However, Vera didn't think that it was really not worth mentioning like Wu Ming said. Not to mention other things, this gift that could restore the vitality of so many people, Wu Ming casually used it, and it didn't seem to be at full strength, nor was it a one-time use. This was already very surprising. Not to mention, Wu Ming's reign of life affected several outer sect members. Wu Ming was also very helpless about this. This group of people in the alliance originally surrounded the outer sect of the 54545. If he simply released the reign of life in one place, the people in other places wouldn't be able to receive it. So he had no choice but to increase the range of the reign of life. Anyway, it didn't take much effort. In Wu Ming's view, it was just an apology for burning the entire outer sect of the 54545. However, Wu Ming forgot that at that time, the Black Mud Cave occupied the entire outer sect of the 54545. Even if he didn't burn the entire outer sect of the 54545, he still had to clean it up afterwards. As expected of you. You've really broadened my horizons once again. Chapter 878. The person who spoke was naturally White Yuxia, who had followed behind. Speaking of which, Villo, you're really omnipotent. White Yuxia crossed her arms as she floated beside Wu Ming. She was also receiving the baptism of the rain of life. The last trace of her mental exhaustion had also completely disappeared. This rain of life is enough to heal all the injured. I'll take my leave then. I won't be participating in the reconstruction of the outer sect of 54,545. After all, there were still many things to deal with. After Wu Ming finished speaking, he flapped his wings and flew into the distance. Hey! Why don't you leave Vera behind? White Yuxia roared in annoyance. Vera can't help much anyway. It's not like she's missing. Wu Ming's voice came from the sky. Immediately after, black-purple ripples appeared. Wu Ming and Vera's figures disappeared. Seriously, my role is really just to clean up this Villo's mess. Although her tone was helpless, White Yuxia wasn't dissatisfied. After knowing that absolute evil had broken through the seal, she had thought of many endings. Now, all she had to do was sacrifice land and towns to kill absolute evil. It couldn't be better. Moreover, other than a small number of people who died because of the chaos at the beginning, there were basically no more casualties. Because of Wu Ming's reign of life, everyone's physical injuries and mental exhaustion had recovered. It could be said that everyone was happy. White Yuxia's mood was much better after eliminating absolute evil at such a low price. Even if she had to clean up someone else's mess, White Yuxia was happy. Go and make the final speech. After White Yuxia finished speaking, she flew down. After all, in the absence of Vera, only White Yuxia could make the final declaration of victory. At that moment, in a place far away that was not affected by the rain of life, a few people who were obviously Salamandra were carrying a person who had fainted from the ups and downs of the journey. They were still speeding up. Lord Mandela, we're almost at the next outer sect. You have to hold on. However, at that moment, Mandela could no longer speak. Immediately after, Mandela's head tilted and he completely fainted. Lord Mandela? Between 3999999 and 4000000 was the place where the Fire Dragon's birth ceremony was held. As they had confirmed that Absolute Evil's doppelganger had completely disappeared, the restoration work had already begun. Whether it was the ground or the houses, they were all being restored by professionals with their blessings. The undamaged bell tower was the fastest to be repaired. At the highest point of the bell tower, dark purple ripples appeared, and Wuming, who had already transformed into his human form, emerged with Vera in his arms. Wuming sighed as he gently put Vera down. Previously, Wuming still had business to attend to, so he didn't pay much attention to Vera's body. In Wuming's opinion, a large part of the reason why Vera didn't have a fixed place to stay all day was because of Maxwell's pestering. Now, Vera could stay in the community obediently and take on the responsibility of being the leader of the community. However, why did Vera wander around all day? Vera was probably the only one who knew. Wuming suddenly thought of something and looked at Vera again. By the way, Vera, Maxwell dropped a gift after his death. Are you interested? It could be said that Vera helped Wuming lure Maxwell out. If they were to split the loot, Vera would definitely have a share. At that moment, Vera shook her head frantically. At the same time, Vera's chest trembled. Okay, I got it. Wuming, who turned his head again, sighed. Sure enough, even if Maxwell was dead, Vera still didn't want to have anything to do with him. Then, the gift that Maxwell dropped could only be enjoyed by Wuming alone. Then, Wuming turned his head again to look at Vera. I'll send you home. After all, Vera shouldn't have returned to her community for a long time. It just so happened that she could go back now. Home? Not knowing what to think, Vera smiled and nodded. Chapter 879. Inside the inherent enchantment of the Staff of Anzavulgan, the 7th floor, the lava zone. Galgi sat alone on a higher rock with his eyes closed as if he was resting. Although the terrain was higher, the rock was still slightly red due to the temperature of the lava zone. Not only that, but the surrounding temperature also made Galgi quite uncomfortable. Helplessly, he could only silently half-activate the simulated another cosmology to resist the heat of the rock and the surrounding temperature. At this moment, there was a spatial fluctuation around Galgi. A black-purple ripple appeared, and Wuming jumped out from it. After sending Vera off, Wuming immediately came here. He had something to discuss with Galgi. You don't look too bad. Wuming joked with Galgi. Galgi opened his eyes and looked at Wuming, his eyes full of shock and fear. He didn't know what he saw and couldn't remember it at all. It was as if he had seen something beyond his level. His brain began to tremble, and his body began to feel uncomfortable as if he was about to explode and die. Galgi subconsciously cancelled the half-activated simulation of another cosmology, bent over, and kept retching. Ugh, if Galgi had the courage to resist Wuming before, then he had no thoughts of resisting the current Wuming. Would ants try to kill Earth? Ants didn't have such thoughts at all. They didn't even realize what Earth was. At this moment, Galgi was somewhat similar to an ant. However, this ant realized what Earth was, so he couldn't resist at all. Moreover, it was as if understanding what Earth was beyond the scope of understanding for an ant like him. Galgi's body couldn't bear it and was about to explode. Wuming silently frowned when he saw Galgi like this. Why is Galgi so rude? He vomits as soon as he sees someone. However, what Wuming didn't know was that the reason why Galgi was like this was because the half-activated simulated cosmology allowed Galgi to see the high-level Wuming. If Galgi fully activated the simulated cosmology, he would probably explode on the spot with just a glance. Wuming was a little unhappy at this moment. He didn't care about Galgi and let him retch alone. Galgi retched for a while and spat out some unknown liquid, which was instantly evaporated by the high temperature of the lava field. Then, Galji tried to raise his head again and look at Wu Ming. Sure enough, after cancelling the simulation of another cosmology, Galji's feeling of looking at Wu Ming again was not much different from before. Galji himself also understood that it was probably the simulation of another cosmology that allowed Galji to glimpse a corner of Silent Cry's true self. After adjusting his state of mind, Galji stood up with a respectful attitude. At this moment, Galji no longer had any thoughts of resisting Wu Ming. "Are you okay?" Wu Ming looked at the strange Galji and was puzzled. Why is he so respectful after vomiting? "I'm fine, Sir Villo." "May I ask what happened to absolute evil?" Galji looked at Wu Ming respectfully. "Az Dakaha is dead." Wu Ming wasn't used to Galji's attitude. Wu Ming turned his head and didn't look at Galji. "He really is dead." Galji wasn't surprised, as if he took it for granted. This puzzled Wu Ming. "You killed him, didn't you?" This piqued Wu Ming's interest. Galji clearly knew that humans wouldn't be killed by non-human existences in the final trial, and this information was given to Wu Ming by Galji. So why was he so sure that Wu Ming had killed Az Dakaha? "How so?" Wu Ming asked. "The aura you give me now is very different." There was a hint of seriousness in Galji's respectful eyes, as if he wanted to get to know Wu Ming all over again. "Right now, I don't have any thoughts of resisting you at all." It was mainly because of the half-activated simulated cosmology that Galji saw some existences in Wu Ming that he couldn't understand and couldn't bear. After all, Galji had been considering whether to fully activate the simulated cosmology to kill Wu Ming immediately after Wu Ming appeared. In the end, he had almost died. Galji now understood why Wu Ming dared to leave him alone. It was because Wu Ming had that kind of strength. The corner of Wu Ming that Galji saw could completely reflect Wu Ming's strength. Even if the simulated cosmology was the power of a universe group, it couldn't instantly kill a bug like the root dragon. At most, it could only cause some damage. After all, it must be known that Galji was able to see those things just now because of the simulation of another cosmology. Since he was able to see the truth of silent wonder, it would at least have some effect. But it was probably only a little. Moreover, if Galji really used the simulated cosmology to launch a sneak attack on Wu Ming, today would probably be his death anniversary. "I was indeed the one who killed Az Dakaha." Wu Ming had no intention of hiding it. Instead, he openly admitted it. But Wu Ming didn't say how he killed Az Dakaha. However, Galji didn't need Wu Ming to tell him. What a joke. He almost died just by looking at Az Dakaha, so how could it be difficult for Az Dakaha to deal with absolute evil? Immediately after, Wu Ming said, "By the way, Maxwell is also dead." Galji was taken aback. Before the battle with absolute evil, Wu Ming clearly told Galji that Maxwell was captured by Wu Ming. And now, Galji and Wu Ming had only met for less than a day, and Galji was told by Wu Ming that Maxwell was dead. No matter how one looked at it, it was full of contradictions. But immediately after, Galji calmed down. Logically speaking, Wu Ming wouldn't lie about such a thing. In other words, Maxwell died during this period of time, or Wu Ming immediately executed Maxwell after killing Az Dakaha. The correct answer was that Maxwell died during this period of time. The boon game that Wu Ming set up for Maxwell was to defeat the host in a specified location and time. After Galji killed Wu Ming's clone with another cosmology, Wu Ming created another clone and got it to accompany Maxwell while he went to look for Galji. At that time, Maxwell wasn't dead yet, so Wu Ming wasn't lying when he told Galji and the others that Maxwell was captured by me. And now, Maxwell was naturally executed as a death penalty by the boon game. Not to mention that Silent had already left, leaving behind only a doppelganger. Maxwell couldn't even beat a doppelganger. Silent's doppelganger watched as Maxwell gradually went crazy due to the approaching death. In the end, it was punished by the bestowment game, turning into light and disappearing. And the reason why Galji calmed down was naturally because he realized the problem. Based on the indescribable truth that he saw about Wu Ming, how could the current Wu Ming not be able to kill Maxwell? Chapter 880. Moreover, as Vera had previously understood, Wu Ming was an existence that could even kill humans in the final trial. How could he not be able to deal with a mere 4-digit number of demon kings? I understand. Thank you, Sir Villo, for helping me get rid of Maxwell. Galji respectfully thanked Wu Ming. After all, Maxwell was someone sent by the higher-ups to monitor them, and Galji wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. Do you know the secret of Maxwell's immortality? Wu Ming suddenly asked Galji. Galji revealed an expression as if he already knew. Sir Villo, I know the power in Maxwell's body. It's the power of the third perpetual motion mechanism from the future. So you do know? Wu Ming said as he waved his hand, and a small ball of light filled with a strange light appeared in Wu Ming's hand. The ball of light emitted a strange light that seemed to be constantly moving. This was the source of Maxwell's power that Galji had mentioned, the third perpetual motion mechanism from the future. Wu Ming didn't know much about science. When Wu Ming arrived at the 5th floor of Nazalic and his doppelganger handed the ball of light to Wu Ming was still confused. The appraisal of the third perpetual motion mechanism was done by Collis. Collis had a large amount of information stored in her database, and with her processing system, as well as Collis' highest-grade magic attire, as well as the influence of her origin power, Collis could easily do this. Moreover, Collis had also made the same judgment on the already dead Maxwell. Maxwell was a hypothetical, humanoid demon, or similar mechanism proposed by the British physicist James Clerk Maxwell that could detect and control the movement of a single molecule. Later generations called it a hypothetical spirit, or demon. Maxwell was a demon born from a paradox that was denied from the beginning, so he naturally didn't have a physical body. As a hypothetical demon born from this paradox, his strength couldn't even withstand a slightly stronger physical attack. But because of the third perpetual motion mechanism, Maxwell combined it with his own characteristics of not having a physical body to be able to produce himself infinitely and resurrect instantly after death. However, even with the perpetual motion mechanism, Maxwell couldn't resist the rules of the box. Maxwell was successfully killed by Wu Ming using the gift game, and the perpetual motion mechanism naturally became the dropped item that killed Maxwell. After all, this third perpetual motion mechanism wasn't Maxwell himself. According to Collis, the third perpetual motion mechanism was a byproduct of Maxwell. In that case, could Maxwell, who could freely control Absolute Evil's doppelganger, have something to do with Absolute Evil Azi Dakaha? However, after having this thought, Wu Ming immediately stopped thinking. In any case, those two fellows had already been killed. What was the point of pondering over this? After Maxwell died, he dropped this ball of light. Wu Ming wasn't afraid that Galji would snatch it away, so he openly showed it to Galji. Congratulations, Sir Villo. Galji smiled as if it was from the bottom of his heart, and this made Wu Ming feel quite awkward. But I presume that you don't need this now that you've fully recovered, right? Galji's words had a hidden meaning. You've already guessed it. Wu Ming wasn't surprised. Galji's fully recovered referred to Wu Ming's recovery of his body. Galji had seen Wu Ming before, or rather, he had seen Wu Ming wrapped in black mud. Although he didn't know where he had seen it, Galji was completely certain that he had seen Wu Ming's body before. Moreover, Galji's mind wasn't the same as 16 Nights. After calming down, he probably realized that Wu Ming, who killed Absolute Evil, had already retrieved Wu Ming's body. And if Galji had really seen Wu Ming's body, he would naturally understand that Wu Ming didn't need the third perpetual motion mechanism that much. You want it? Wu Ming looked at Galji with a playful expression and tossed the two balls of light in his hands. To tell you the truth, we've already figured out Maxwell's nature. We originally planned to kill him after this incident. Galji's words implied that the perpetual motion mechanism was something that they had long planned to use, but who knew that it would be intercepted by Wu Ming halfway. So, you want to continue the deal with me? However, Wu Ming was amused by his own words. I'm afraid you haven't realized the situation you're in, Your Highness. Although all of Galji's subordinates addressed Galji as Your Highness, it was rather ironic for Wu Ming to say these two words. Putting aside the fact that your another cosmology is useless against me, even if you have other trump cards, do you think they will work on me? It wasn't that Wu Ming was arrogant, but his body had experienced countless years of accumulation in the box court world. Even though it was still underage, it was only a step away from adulthood. In Wu Ming's knowledge, an adult origin dragon and an underage origin dragon were two different species. If an underage origin dragon was considered a living creature, an adult origin dragon was no longer a living creature. As for what it was, Wu Ming would only know after he became an adult. All in all, Even though Wu Ming wasn't an adult origin dragon, Wu Ming, who was only a step away from adulthood, was no longer the same as before. Wu Ming was so powerful that even Wu Ming, who had returned to his body, was taken aback. If Wu Ming's strength were to be classified according to the box court world strength, Wu Ming's strength would definitely be in the double digits. As for why it wasn't in the single digits, it was because, firstly, Wu Ming wasn't sure about the strength of the single digits. Secondly, Wu Ming's strength might have exceeded the single digits and reached an unmeasurable level. If it were an adult Wu Ming, there wouldn't be a need to worry because an adult origin dragon would definitely exceed the single digits. But it was also important to clarify that Wu Ming's hypostasis had only become in existence in the double digits. In other words, he had completely embodied the hypostasis that an origin dragon should have, unlike before, when any random person dared to provoke Wu Ming. Of course, Wu Ming had always subconsciously concealed his hypostasis, but Wu Ming didn't realize it. After all, whether it was the world that Wu Ming lived in or everyone in this world, their hypostasis was lower than Wu Ming's. If Wu Ming completely released his aura, anyone who sensed the aura of a higher hypostasis would die instantly. At that moment, Galji became extremely respectful. It was precisely because he had glimpsed Wu Ming's hypostasis when he activated the simulation of the another cosmology that he survived. But it was also because of this that Galji was completely convinced by Wu Ming. At the very least, Galji would never go against Wu Ming again in the future. He didn't even have any thoughts about it anymore. This came from the bottom of his heart like a different kind of curse. Therefore, Galji wouldn't make any more deals with Wu Ming. Chapter 881. You're wrong, Lord Villo. What I meant was that you can use this on your subordinates. Galji smiled and shook his head. If it was the old Galji, he might have tried to make a deal with Wu Ming. However, after being affected by Wu Ming's hypostasis, he had no intention of taking advantage of Wu Ming or even making a deal with him. Of course, the prerequisite is that you have to ensure your subordinates' loyalty. However, Wu Ming looked at Galji strangely. What's wrong with this guy? Master, I'm afraid he saw your hypostasis and was affected by you. Collis directly spoke to Wu Ming in Wu Ming's mind. Did he pry into my status? Wu Ming immediately thought of Pest. He didn't know what Pest had seen when he was summoned, but his attitude toward Wu Ming had completely changed. Unlike Galji's respect, Pest's attitude toward Wu Ming was one of extreme fear. Pest could see Wu Ming's true self because he had established a master-slave relationship with Wu Ming. However, how could Galji see his true self? My aura is indeed suppressed, isn't it, Collis? Wu Ming asked Collis. Since Wu Ming had just returned to his body, he might not have gotten used to it yet. Thus, Wu Ming had Collis monitor his condition. Master, your aura has been subconsciously suppressed by you. It doesn't seem to have been released. Collis had indeed been monitoring Wu Ming's condition, but Wu Ming had been subconsciously suppressing his aura all this time. Logically speaking, it shouldn't have leaked out. Could it be that the another cosmology simulation allowed Galji to see my hypostasis? Wu Ming thought about it. Perhaps only the another cosmology simulation could allow Galji to see his true self. Moreover, his current hypostasis wasn't something someone like Galji could withstand. The difference between the old Wu Ming and the current Wu Ming was like a balloon filled with slow air and a balloon filled with water. As long as the balloon didn't burst, the latter's fall from a high altitude was more lethal than the former's. If Galji had looked at him for a while longer, he might have really died. But now, Galji seems to be very respectful toward me. Wu Ming had an idea. Galji. What is it, Lord Villo? Galji looked at Wu Ming. Tell me everything about the person behind you. That's right. Wu Ming was trying to use Galji's current state to get information about the person behind Galji. But Galji shook his head. Lord Villo, I'm afraid that won't do. It seemed that even if Galji was very respectful, he wasn't at the point where he would listen to Wu Ming's every word. Master, he clearly respects you because of your strength. Everyone knows that respecting the strong is common knowledge in any world. Collis complained in Wu Ming's mind. I know. I just want to try. Wu Ming replied to Collis in his mind with some regret. However, Wu Ming had other ways to get Galji to reveal information. Let's make a deal, Galji. You tell me everything about the person behind you, and I'll deal with them. Wu Ming's words made Galji's eyes light up. After all, when Galji first learned of Wu Ming's existence, he wanted to make a deal with Wu Ming. He would provide the information, Wu Ming would help him deal with the enemy, and he would gain his freedom. Although they had fallen out before, Galji, who was now affected by Wu Ming's status, was naturally shaken when he heard this deal. 2105-380 Outer Gate. No Name's Base Camp. At this moment, in No Name, Black Rabbit, Letitia, 16 Knights in Reverse, Jio Yuasuka, and Kasuga Hikari stood at the entrance of No Name, ready to go. Ran, Lily, and Pest stood at the entrance and watched the 5 of them leave. Black Rabbit, Letitia, when you reach the North District, you must take care of 16 Knights and the others. Ren reminded Black Rabbit worriedly. I'll try my best, young Master Ren. Black Rabbit looked at the 3 problem children who were full of fighting spirit and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead helplessly. Although Letitia was also helpless, she still comforted Ren. Don't worry, Ren. Master is still in the North District. When the time comes, there's no need to worry about not being able to control these 3. What a joke. When we reach the North District, I must teach that bastard Villo a lesson. There's a Demon King and he didn't call me. 16 Knights in Reverse was very excited. He looked like a wild horse that was about to explode. Same. Seconded. Jio Yuasuka and Kasuga Hikari agreed in unison with 16 Knights in Reverse. The 2 of them were also people who wanted to see the world in chaos. Don't joke around, stupid adults. According to Lord White Yuxia, the Demon King this time is the absolute Demon King of one of the humans' final trials. That's one of the strongest in Hakata. If you continue to underestimate the enemy like this, Black Rabbit won't bring you along. Black Rabbit reprimanded from the side. These 3 problem children were too noisy. The enemy this time was clearly not easy to deal with. That's right, when White Yuxia went to the North District, he sent a letter to No Name. The content was that the seal of absolute evil had been broken. However, White Yuxia had been in the North District for a long time, and No Name had just reorganized their people and prepared to support the North District. It was completely because they could not make a decision. The main reason was that 16 Knights and the other 2 were too suitable for their identity as problem children. They clamored about fighting the Demon King. That was absolute evil. A Demon King with a 3-digit number. Even people with a 2-digit number did not dare to underestimate it. It was fundamentally different from the Demon King that 16 Knights and the other 2 had dealt with during their time in Hakata. If they let the problem children go, who knew what kind of trouble they would cause? They might even lose their lives. In the end, Black Rabbit and 16 Knights and the other 2 came to a compromise before they were ready to go. However, No Name was actually not too late. White Yuxia wrote a letter to tell No Name that it was only because Wu Ming was fighting against absolute evil in the North District. Most of the communities in the East District, more than 99% of them, did not even know that absolute evil had broken the seal in one of the humans' final trials. After all, when Glowing Flame Capital was attacked, many people did not know that absolute evil had broken the seal. Therefore, No Name was not too late. Seeing the 3 problem children obediently shut their mouths, Black Rabbit sighed again. Problem children were just too difficult to deal with. Right on the heels of that, Black Rabbit patted his face to encourage himself. Black Rabbit revealed a smile and raised an arm high. Then everyone, let's go. It had to be said that Black Rabbit looked like he was going on a vacation. It looked like he had underestimated the enemy even more. The 3 problem children complained in their hearts. Right on the heels of that, the 3 problem children looked at each other and smiled tacitly. When they reached the North District, Black Rabbit would be completely useless. However, at this moment, a familiar voice entered everyone's ears. Where are you going? You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.